Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Shawn and Alex. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the finale, the final, the overness of the Chicago Bears season. We'll also be discussing Blackhawks and the Winter Classic, which was played today, and all of the drama that's going on with the Bulls. But first, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. They've got one game this weekend, which is Sunday, January 8th, versus the Chicago Wolves. It's a 4 p.m. game, early start, so you can get home early, so you can start your week on Monday. Head on over to icehogs.com for tickets, jerseys, shirts, hats, and more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. So, Alex, we've had a up and down week, I guess mostly down week here in Chicago sports. I guess what's on the tip of my tongue the most is the Chicago Bulls. I don't even know what to do with them. Is if it couldn't have gotten worse. I mean, we painted a pretty the opposite of a rosy picture for them last week on the show. And if it could have gotten worse, it did this week when the reports came out that Fred Hoiberg is on the hot seat. Is a potential for a midseason firing. And Rajon Rondo is indefinitely suspended. And at best, if he comes back, he'll be playing with the seconds. Do you have anything that you want to add to this debacle that's the Bulls season?
Well, I mean, a debacle is the best way to describe it, really. And, you know, when we signed Rondo, the whole thing came to me, and I'm like, okay, we're signing Rondo, and he's been a pain in the arse in other places he's played, especially Dallas, if you remember that drama there. And I knew this kind of stuff was going to happen, and most Bulls fans did, and he's contributed more harm to the team than good. And you have people like Jimmy Butler like trying to stay positive about it throughout, but you can just tell he's kind of talking through everything, and he knows everything's not fine. The Bulls fans know it's not fine, and you saw New Year's Eve getting blown out by the Bucks again by like 20. I mean, the Bulls are not a good team. You have the coach on the hot seat now. You have player drama. I mean, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And if there's a mid-season firing, you almost have to ask yourself, is this team that was built to at least make the playoffs even going to do that? Now, if you're one of those people who really just wants to see them in the playoffs, at least hold on to the fact that the East is bad. But, I mean, the team itself really is quite the dumpster fire. And, it's almost to the point where I'm just like, you know what, I'm done investing emotion into this team, because why should I? There's really no reason to, with the way they're acting, the way they're playing, the way everything's going right now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's so much the same, and it all goes back to, I know I keep harping on it, and we talked about it last week, but last season first of all, this front office brass of Gar Forman and John Paxson, when things were good and Jimmy was playing well and starting to come into his own, and they were all proud still. It was still, close enough to when he was drafted that they could take credit for it. and they drafted Derrick Rose, and Derrick Rose was playing well. These two were John Paxson, and then, when Gar Forman was brought on board, they were front and center everywhere you could find them. Oh, look at us. And as things got progressively worse, they were MIA, making their once, maybe twice yearly appearance to feed us lines of garbage. And the one thing they said last year was there would be accountability. And if you bring in a hand-picked coach, so their words were when they fired Tom Thibodeau, was that this was a championship roster. It was the coach's fault. And they hand-picked a coach to bring in this modern, spread style, fast-paced offense that was going to fit better into today's NBA. They brought them in to do this system, and they promised that they were going to be younger, more athletic, and better shooting. And they are worse in all three of those phases.
They're the opposite of what they said they wanted them to be.
Absolutely. You know what? I think Rajon Rondo could be a good fit. He needs, maybe a San Antonio where you have got veteran players and a veteran coach and a system that works, and you're going to win night in, night out. That's where a Rajon Rondo is going to flourish. I think he's 30 years old? He's still got talent, but you have to know what you have. You have to know what he can do. You said you were going to get younger, and you were going to get up more athletic, and you were going to have shooters to fit into this Hoiberg system. And what did you do? You were one of the worst defensive teams last year. So you bring in a guard who needs the ball a lot, shoots a poor percentage, and he's shooting his career worst from the field so far this year.
Yep.
He needs the ball a lot. He hasn't played defense since he's the Boston days. I don't know what they're trying to say. So if you are to fire Fred Hoiberg, even if you fire him at the end of the season, and not that I'm saying that Fred Hoiberg is a good coach or Fred Hoiberg is the answer, but Jerry Reinsdorf should sit down with Gar and Pax and say, listen, you wanted a chef that's going to cook a ribeye steak, and all you gave him were hot dogs. What do you expect?
Right.
Why are you throwing the coach under the bus? Every time there's failure with this organization, clearly it's the coach's fault. It's never management's fault. At what point do they get held responsible? When do their feet get held to the fire?
Right, and it's kind of like one of those things where Gar and Pax kind of try to protect themselves, so to speak, to make them not look like the bad guy or make them look, like they want to lose. They try to put these things together and, give the accountability to other people. They don't want to look like they were the ones who made the big mistake. I mean, look at all the times they've missed out on superstars. And then they go out and sign, like Carlos Boozer to a ton of money, or Pau Gasol, who I will give credit, did some good things with the Bulls, but just to kind of make themselves look like they're truly, not at fault in any way, or, there's so much lack of accountability with this franchise, up and down. It's amazing. And, like you said, Fred Hoiberg may not be the answer, and he may not be the best coach, but, when you give him the exact opposite of the system he plays, that's kind of stuff's going to happen. It's going to make it harder to coach.
Yeah, and it's, as a fan, you sit there and you're like, all right, well, what's the point of me sitting down and investing, 2.5, 3 hours into a game, or, spending money going to a game, or buying merchandise? I mean, if you think about the casual fan, the one who they watch, I don't know, maybe 2 games a month, 1 game a month, but they buy a jersey so they can sport it around when the team's winning. Mm-hmm. What player do they go buy? I mean, they buy Jimmy Butler, and then Do you buy a Dwayne Wade? You don't buy a Rondo. You're not buying a Cristiano Felicio. I don't. It goes back to who is the face of this franchise. And Jimmy Butler, you talked about getting rid of him up until the end of last season. Even in the offseason, there was rumors that he might get traded, and suddenly you bought faced, and you were like, well, no, now we're just going to get rid of Derek, and we're going to build around Jimmy. So, I mean, this is a guy who could be traded by the trade deadline. I mean, for the way this organization goes.
And how many years have we said now, oh, the Bulls are looking into Marcus Cousins. Let's get to Marcus Cousins, you know? Like, that was the big, trade talk last year, and, I think in the year before there was even talk about it. It was much more intense last year, but, how many times are they going to say this kind of thing? And they say they're going to build around Jimmy. I mean, well, okay, you want to get younger and more athletic? Okay, but then don't sign Wade and Rondo and have this completely we want to contend and rebuild type deal when what you're really doing at the end of the day is just trying not to be bad. And right now they're pretty mediocre. And I mean, the first few games of the season, they played some entertaining games, but other than Jimmy Butler and when Dwayne Wade has a good game, there's nothing interesting to me about this Bulls team. Nothing. Even the young players who either A, rot on the bench, or B, just aren't playing good because they're not developed properly, there's nothing interesting to watch. At least if you have a team like the Timberwolves. Their roster, you look at some of the young guys they have, the team as a whole may not be good, but they have some young, fun guys to watch. Look at Milwaukee. Their record isn't great, but you got guys like the Greek Freak, who, in my opinion, is probably one of the most entertaining basketball players to watch these days. I mean, his athleticism is unreal. I mean, at least you have that. With the Bulls, you have one really good player and one future Hall of Fame player who's passed his effectiveness on a team that's built to be a playoff contender possibly, but not a championship contender with no future. It's hard for me to invest time in it.
Yeah, and I wonder at what point, because I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Jerry Reinsdorf is interested in making money. He doesn't want to lose money, and
right.
As much as he says he wants to win, and he probably somewhere down there wants to win, but to what extent does he want to win? Because you can't be all in on winning and still, step back a second, is I really believe to have a sustained winning organization is you need stability. I agree with that. And you have to go through the ups and downs of having a general manager or front office, group and a head coach that you're going to go through ups and downs, bad seasons, good seasons with, and you got to stay the course. I completely understand that, but with the way that this Bulls organization is going, it's gone beyond we're staying the course and we're trying to build we're trying to build something here. Is now we're just, I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to stay the course. It's ass backwards.
Right.
So, now you went out there and your prime number one free agent target was Rajon Rondo in the offseason. Again, Rajon Rondo, I think, could help somebody with a veteran team. If you have a Paul Pierce and a Kevin Garnett, at the end of their primes, and you bring in a Rajon Rondo, fine, perfectly good, because those two will put you in your place so fast. And who on this team is going to put Rajon Rondo in his place? Who's there to put Jimmy in his place? Dwayne Wade can only do so much. Fred Hoiberg's not putting anybody in their place. So now you have Rajon Rondo, who has been suspended indefinitely. And when asked about it, Hoiberg gives the, I don't know. And then they asked him about running with the seconds. He's like, maybe. So, I mean, it's pretty clear by his lack of enthusiasm when talking about him is that he doesn't want him on this team.
Right.
John Paxson is a fireball. You know that he's gonna end up going to blows with Rajon Rondo at any moment. And so what do you do? Do you talk to him about just voiding his contract and letting him out, or buying him out of it, or see if there's somebody dumb enough to trade for him?
I mean, at this point, I think you got to try those kind of options. I mean, someone might trade for him. I don't know. I mean, it's worth at least trying to look, and if not, then like you said, kind of a buyout, or look at his contract just to get him out of here, because he's becoming a cancer, and that's kind of something that a lot of us saw coming. I mean, people were taking bets online on how long it's going to take for him to get suspended or to get into a, quote, cancerous situation, if that makes sense.
And the funny part is the first, 15, 18 games of the season, they were playing really well, and Rajon Rondo was playing very well and was a key ingredient to the success that they had. And then the rest of the league figured out what they did. The Bulls have no answer. And you have a team that's just not built for today's NBA.
Exactly. And I mean, they're playing off old mentalities with old players. And, it seems like, again, you see this common theme with a Jerry Reinsdorf-owned team. Look at all these has-beens. Has-beens are going to take us to the promised land that these has-beens have taken other teams 5-10 years ago. I mean, you can't do that. You really can't. This organization is so unbelievably lost. It's like, I almost want to say, I might even go ahead and just say this, that they are the furthest away from any team in this city winning a championship. The furthest away.
Oh, absolutely. Because the Cubs are still in World Series window. They just won it, 2 months ago.
They'll have a World Series window for some time now.
Correct. And the White Sox, I would say the White Sox were right there with them until they made the correct move to have a fire sale. And they made some really smart trades so far and have gotten some really good talent in the minor league system. So now they at least have hope for the future.
They have a legitimate direction.
Yes, they have a direction. They have a foundation, and they're getting rid of all these high-priced veterans that are clogging up the payroll, clogging up the path to the majors. The Blackhawks are at the very tail end of their window, but they're still there. The Bears, we'll talk about them. I think they're healthy if they can at least stabilize that quarterback position, not find somebody good, find somebody who's not throwing for 80 interceptions a game or fumbling 80 times, is just playing a mediocre game. I think they're at least a playoff team in next year.
Yeah, I think the Bears are, as bad as they were this year, I think they are closer to good things than people think. Now, of course, there's still a lot of holes and things to be fixed, but, I'm sure we'll get to the Bears later, but, I think they're a little closer than people may think.
Oh, yeah, you just look at the last draft and how many very solid players have come out of that last draft. When was the last time you could say that about the Bulls? Jimmy Butler, was that 2011, 2010?
Yeah, that was at the turn of the decade. It's 2017 now, and, the Bulls have been painted for a while as this team that drafts well, but then you think of recent drafts, you think of Marcus Teague, you think of McBuckets, you think of Valentine, you think of Portis, and, they're not what Jimmy Butler and in-prime Derrick Rose and in-prime Noah were back in 2007, 2008 in those drafts, and in, 2010, 2011 with Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't think Doug McDermott is a bad player. I think he's just a fish out of water. He's a bad defensive player, flat out. But this is a league that's not built on great defense. It's about high scoring, shooting 3-pointers. he is a good offensive player and he can shoot the ball. So why do you have him out there when he's not shooting threes?
Right. Now, I mean, and you bring up a really, really interesting point, and I was talking about this on another show the other day. We were talking about kind of how, the NBA a little over 10 years ago versus now, you look at the scheme and how different it is. You look at, 10 some years ago, you saw games ending 84-76, much more often than it is today. It's very, very different today to what it was back then. And when you don't have good shooting like the Bulls do, you're not going to put up those points and you're not going to win. I mean, look how bad their three-point shooting is. I mean, it's horrendous.
It would be 27%?
Yeah, something like that. It's not good at all. And you had Hoiberg saying how, I want you, and you to shoot more threes, and these guys in their careers were not great three-point shooters. I mean, he was talking to I think it was to Dwayne Wade about shooting threes, and, he's made more threes than he made the year before, but going into this season with that mentality, it's like, well, wait, he didn't really shoot threes well last year. Getting at this advanced age, you're demanding a lot of threes from a team overall, not just Dwayne Wade that can't shoot threes. It's not like we have, Kyle Korver anymore, and doesn't help that Niko Mirotic, who after his rookie year has been frankly awful, missing a lot of threes. I mean, they're just, they're all bad at shooting threes, and don't let Kanan's first few games fool you when he was draining everything. He hasn't played to that level since.
Yeah, and another guy that's a fish out of water is Niko Mirotic. You've got a guy who can do other things. Don't just have him stand out on the arc trying to shoot threes. It's move him around. Use him offensively correctly and try to create mismatches. I mean, I think I don't know what the feud is about with Rajon Rondo, but $20 says that he's more right than he is wrong. He may not be taking a tactful way of doing it, and he may be being a big baby about it, but I bet Rajon Rondo, has a better idea of what this team should be doing to win, and it's being looked at as being insubordinate, and he's being, spanked over it. I mean, I saw a Vine clip of, it was on my phone, so I couldn't quite make it out, and it was really short, but it looked like it was Rajon Rondo screaming at somebody to pass the ball to a wide open Doug McDermott for a three. And I'm like, he gets it, is let the 3-point shooter shoot 3-pointers. Let him do it when he's open.
Oh yeah, I mean, his IQ of the game is really good. He's a very smart and good basketball player. I mean, his antics may be unorthodox and he may cause problems in the organization, but he's not stupid when it comes to basketball. It'd be nice if he had a much better attitude and approach about things, but I'm sure he realizes that there's a lot of dysfunction going on.
Oh, absolutely. He knows there's dysfunction, and he needs a strong locker room. He's like a Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman was a fantastic basketball player. I mean, a Hall of Fame basketball player.
Yep.
Probably the best rebounder in history, especially, considering his size. And one of the best defenders ever. But he needed structure and support around him, and he needed strong players around him. And he didn't get that. Well, he got that in the beginning in Detroit, and then he had it at the end in Chicago. But anywhere else, he didn't have it, and he ran amok.
He didn't have it in San Antonio.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, this is a really kind of interesting comparison. This may be kind of a stretch, but bear with me here. You remember the Drake LaRoche incident in the White Sox clubhouse, right, in spring training last year?
Oh, I talked ad nauseum about that, but I still make jokes about the clubhouse leader as little Drake LaRoche.
Right. Yeah. It all sounds ridiculous, and you had guys like Adam Eaton and Chris Sale, yelling at the front office for not letting Drake LaRoche, be in that clubhouse and be there, which, oh yeah, I mean, on Kenny Williams' part, a 14-year-old kid should not be in a major league clubhouse all the time. I mean, that's ridiculous. But it does kind of show that it's clear to the players on that White Sox team that there really was no leader and there really was some dysfunction. And it was clear to them. Now, were their priorities in the right place by calling Drake LaRoche a leader? No, but they could clearly see that there was some sort of dysfunction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the nose with that one, is when you have players that are talented, but they're head cases, and you don't provide structure. And that's the whole thing is to have a winning team year in, year out, is you need, a coach or manager, you need front office that are on the same page, that have, smarts about what they're doing. They are looking not only at the present, but at the future, and they have strong control over their players, and they have player leaders that are helping them to get to that common goal. And the thing is you had Robin Ventura, who's a very nice guy. Robin Ventura's a very nice guy, but he's not a good coach, and he wasn't that hellfire and brimstone.
No, quite the opposite.
Yeah, like if Tommy Lasorda, if a player would have screamed at the general manager, Tommy Lasorda would have had him out there and clubbing him during batting practice with a bat.
Oh yeah. Lou
Piniella, he would not have had any of that either. Like, right or wrong, those guys would have put them in their place. And Fred Hoiberg goes into that latter category. And there's a time and place for a player manager. I mean, Steve Kerr is a similar type guy. He's not a hellfire and brimstone guy. He's much more of a player's coach, but they have much more of a veteran team that buys into what they do, and plus they are having success, which goes a long way.
Right, and if you respect the coach, I mean, that can go a long way. When there's lack of respect for a coach, which I think I could kind of see here from some of these players, that creates problems. And it's funny that you further bring up like Robin Ventura. I've been saying this over and over. Hoiberg and Ventura could be brothers, it seems like. They have that kind of just same straight face throughout the game. Quite the opposite of the fiery predecessor they had, whether it was Ozzie Guillen or it was Tom Thibodeau. It went from that to that. It's just kind of funny how that works.
And both of them got the crap kicked out of them by Nolan Ryan. You might be too young to remember that.
I don't remember it happening, but I've seen that clip. It's 40-year-old Nolan Ryan.
I remember that. It was 46-year-old Nolan Ryan. Because I remember
46, he was that old.
I still have the newspaper clip from the day after it happened. This was 91 or something. This was before the internet and, having ESPN. And a
few years before my time.
Yeah, several years before you were even thought of. I used to, if I didn't watch the game, I would have to read in the paper the next day about the box score. And I remember I clipped out the headline. The front page was Nolan Ryan with Robin Ventura in a headlock, just punching him away. And it said Nolan Ryan, parenthesis 46, punches Robin Ventura, parenthesis 23. He was twice his age, and just kicked the crap out of him. That was, I've always been a Cubs fan my whole life, but I still laugh to this day about that clip.
That's so funny. And it's funny to think that Nolan Ryan was playing as much time, if not a little longer, than Robin Ventura was even alive. Think about that.
Yep. I mean, there was what was it, a couple years ago when, what was the kicker's name for the Lions? I can't think of his name. They had a kicker who was 40 something years old, and he had been in the league for 21 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when these rookies came in, there's rookies, and he's like, I've been in the NFL since before you were born.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
baseball,
hilarious.
you can have these long careers, but NFL you don't. So just like that, it was just like, how do you even talk to that guy? Because he's seen everything in several different eras.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's in football especially, that's really a big feat. And there have been several cases where like Anthony Rizzo was a huge David Ortiz fan growing up, and he just retired, and he had that monster year at the plate, like a normal David Ortiz year plus a little something extra. It's stories like that are really, really quite incredible. And talking about respective players and talking about how they handle it with their coaches, an interesting thing that this kind of reminds me of a little bit is, you remember when Jason Kidd was a coach for that 1 year?
Yep.
And he basically came out of the league and coached. And you're thinking, are these players really respecting a guy they were just playing against the year before as their head coach? A guy's that may be just a few years older than you? I think that just kind of goes to show that respect for a coach can really go a long way.
I think so too. And part of it is, part of the reason it's nice to have an older coach as well is that give you time to forget about the dumb stuff they did that you can hold against them.
Yes.
What is, when they're still playing or just after they're done playing, is there's all these stories of their antics or things that they've done. Give it 15, 20 years so you forget. And so they can't hold that against you, because if they look at you as, oh yeah, you did dumb stuff too, it's hard for you to have a leg to stand on. But after that has gone by and you've established this record of not doing dumb stuff or not having these antics, it goes a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at, some other sports is a little different because, a lot of sports, let's say hockey. Hockey's got a lot of minor leagues and other systems and, younger junior leagues and all that. And, a lot of coaches, you'll see them kind of start really low and work their way up. So by the time they're in the NHL, it's been a long time since they were a player. And the same can be said about baseball. I mean, look at Joe Madden. He started off as a minor league coach, worked his way up in the early 2000s as a bench coach with the Angels. Then he eventually became a big league coach in 2006, I think it was. So that's kind of a scenario where you could kind of take the time to work that away and become a manager or a coach. Whereas in, we've seen in basketball here, it's not always the case because, a lot of them can start in college and go to the NBA. But, look like Jason Kidd in that case, you're coming pretty much straight from playing to coaching. And, that was no time at all to forget any of Kidd's playing career, because almost that entire league played against him the year before. So yeah, I definitely agree. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, and wrapping it back or circling back around to the Bulls, is they're playing Charlotte tonight, and Charlotte's another team they've had trouble with. They're not a great team. They're another mediocre team, but that's
what they struggle the most against.
They struggle against those teams, and I just checked the score right now, and they're losing. Surprise, surprise. And then they play Cleveland on Wednesday. So it's not like they have these cakewalk games coming up, and you're already struggling, and you mentioned before that they're a mediocre team, and if you really think about it, is in every sense of the word, they're mediocre. They're right in the middle of the league in defense, right in the middle of the league in offense, right in the middle of the conference in record. They are mediocre in every sense that you can think of, and
they define NBA mediocrity this year. They are the definition of it.
Oh, absolutely, and that is the worst place to be, right in the middle.
Yes, absolutely. Like I say, being mediocre is the worst place in sports these days. You don't want to be 81-81. in baseball. You don't want to be 40 and 42 in basketball. You don't want to have, I don't know, what, 80 points or so in the NHL?
In the NFL, you could be 8-8 and go to the Super Bowl, so that might be all right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in this league, yeah, it depends on your division. That really does. But in most other sports, you're not going to have an average, you're not going to have an average record and get into the playoffs and, make a run. I mean, every now and then, there's a really bad division in baseball. Hint, hint, the 2006 Cardinals, where you win like low 80s games, somehow win it all, but that really doesn't happen often. But I mean, look at some of the sub 500 teams that have been in the playoffs in the NFL. I mean, and more or less even are able to win a game. But in basketball especially when you need superstar talent, being mediocre is the worst.
And I don't know if you wanted to take this time to transition over to the Blackhawks, and they played in the Winter Classic today. Unfortunately, I had to work today, and I kept going down to the gym at work so I could watch part of the game.
There you go.
At noon, but this is a team that luckily built a big cushion.
Yes,
at the beginning part of the season because they're not playing well right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I say about it is they're pretty banged up. They have been pretty banged up. This is kind of always that time post-New Year's. Seems like often when the Hawks kind of go in that little slump and they're not scoring well and their defense doesn't look great. I mean, that's kind of the scenario of the game today in St. Louis. They didn't score. They didn't have a lot of scoring chances in the second half of the game. Corey Crawford, if it wasn't for him, they probably could have lost that game 7-1. I mean, when you think about all the chances the Blues had, especially in the third period.
Oh, I mean, that one-on-one with Tarasenko, that should have been a goal.
Oh, yeah.
That most goalies in the league, that's a goal. And Crawford stood tall on that one.
Yep. And the Hawks couldn't get any chances, really, from that. After that, they really couldn't. When they were down by 2 with an empty net, they couldn't get their puck out of the zone. They did a great job of keeping the puck out of the net for a while, but they couldn't get it out.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been a problem with the Blackhawks is they've transitioned into this team that tries to keep the game close and win with, win 1-goal games with great goaltending and ratcheting it in and playing tight defense down low. But the problem is that they created this model where they win with speed. The rest of the league, they're like the anti-Bulls, where the Bulls are so far behind trends. The Blackhawks were ahead of it, is everybody else was trying to, have big bruisers and beat up on people to win series in the playoffs. The Blackhawks just used speed, more speed, and rolled 4 lines of speed at people and had speedy defensemen and great goaltending.
Yep.
And now other teams are adding speed. Is the other night they lost to Winnipeg. Winnipeg came out there and they looked so much faster than the Blackhawks. I mean, Blake Wheeler looked like a Wayne Gretzky in his prime out there compared to everybody.
Yeah, and it really doesn't help that Kane doesn't look right to me. I don't know about you, but he doesn't look right to me.
Yeah, he'll flash out there that, it's like a mental lapses almost. Sometimes he'll go out there and just make he's got sore feet or bad knees, and then he'll suddenly wake up and then go out there and have, this great back check. And you're like, what's the deal with you?
Yeah, I mean, he's been doing okay at, some of the small things like that. But when it comes to what he traditionally does with the scoring and the putting up points, I mean, he had a great game against Nashville. But, I mean, other than that, he just hasn't been putting up Patrick Kane numbers, especially after a year he won the MVP. I mean, last year he had his MVP year. That was a career year for him. And people thought that, the assault allegations the summer before were going to hinder that, but they didn't that year. But both Kane and Taves' production numbers overall are just not where they're used to be. The guys putting up the numbers are guys like, scoring-wise, mind you, are like Anisimov and Hossa, and both
Panarin.
those guys have been injured. So that's a big factor, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, Nismov just coming back from injury, and you have Hossa back to injury. So Hossa's injured, Kruger is injured, and they are
Your big PK guy there.
Yeah, you are 1-4-1 since Hossa got injured, and that's scary because he's an old player. I say that he's younger than I am, but he's not that much younger than I am, and he's an old player. And how much longer can you count on him? You mentioned Taves, Kane, and their lack of production, but those guys are almost a third of your salary cap. Those two guys, and
right.
If you're paying two guys a third of your salary cap, is they've got to produce. Like, they have to produce. You can't have this lack of production. And I'm not one of those meatballs that's like, we gotta trade Taves, he sucks now. Is
Those are the worst.
Yeah, clearly you're not watching the games. He's a very good player. His scoring's down, but you need his scoring. Kane, on the other hand, he's just in a slump of some sort. And part of it is when you play with Panarin, he's really good. And
yes,
he's gonna get his opportunities too. And this week the Blackhawks pulled out a miracle and signed him to a 2-year contract extension for $12 million.
Yeah, I mean, Stan Bowman knows how to work with that salary cap.
It is going to be slash city. He has some idea of what he's going to do. Because, I mean, it's funny. I keep hearing people saying like, oh, what are the Blackhawks going to do now? Now they have this, new contract that they have to pay. And I can absolutely assure you that Stan Bowman thought about the repercussions of giving a player a $6 million a year contract.
Of course.
It's not like he's at the end of the season when he's looking at the budget and going, crap. What did we do? He thought about this. He's got a plan. I mean, there's going to be...
He's dealt with this how many times?
Yeah, there's going to be decisions to be made, but I mean, this was a no-brainer. Is for Panarin, you either had to sign him and keep him on your team, or you had to trade him to get a lot of value for the future. There's no way you can just let him walk to another team. Like, there's not.
No, with that talent at that age, you cannot do that.
Yeah. So, well, like I said, is if like what they did with, oh my God, why am I forgetting the guy they traded with the restricted contract in the offseason to Montreal?
Oh, Shaw.
Yeah, Andrew Shaw. I'm having an old man moment. Shaw was a restricted free agent, and they traded him, and they got something for nothing. And Shaw's a nice player, but Panarin is an elite player. And
then they got picks that they didn't have anymore because of other trades.
Yeah, so if you weren't going to be able to find a way to sign Panarin under this salary cap, is you were going to have to trade him and get a lot for him, because it's going to come back to bite you someday. So you better win in the future with those draft picks.
Well, yeah, and remember Brandon Saad? I mean, they had to trade him because of what they were demanding for him. I mean, what he was demanding, I should say, for him. He wanted that $6 million a year or something, like a ridiculous amount over 6 years or something. And it was like, no, we can't do that. So they traded him.
Yeah, typically what the Blackhawks do is you have your entry level contract, and then they sign you to a bridge deal before you get the mega deal. Taves and Kane did it. I mean, they got a very, very good bridge deal, but it was still a bridge deal. All these guys get bridge deals, and Brandon Saad didn't want to play that game. He wanted to go right to the big contract to make the money, and I don't blame him, but that was not in the cards. So they traded him, and then they used the money to sign Anisimov.
Yeah, and you know, you look at the Hawks and you look at their history since winning their first cup. 2011, they got destroyed by the salary cap. Absolutely destroyed. They lost a little more than like half their team pretty much. And then they were able to rebound and win, and then they won again 2 years later. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact that they still maintained that really, really good core. The Hawks are now in a situation where they still have that core. It's not getting any younger, but it's not really super old except for, like, say, Marian Hossa. And, of course, we lost Patrick Sharp, but you still have Kane, you still have Tays, you still have Seabrook, you still have Dunks, you still have Jalmerson, you still have Crawford. You know, the Hawks are still cup contenders, but I feel like there's a bit more of an urgency to get one more before the window closes. And the window, it's not closed, but the hand is on the handle and it's slowly starting to push down.
Yeah, I agree. I actually wrote an article and I call it, the slogan for the Blackhawks has been one goal. And I was like, they should change it to one more, please.
Yeah.
And part of it is, this core is both a blessing and a curse because they cost so much money, but that production isn't quite there. Is Duncan Keith a good defenseman? Absolutely. Is he an elite defenseman? Ooh, I don't know if he is now. I mean, just watching him play, he's not the same guy. Doesn't have the same wheels he did, which is a part of what he did. The intangibles are there, but it's just, he's not doing the same things that he did that made him so special.
Right, and I mean, I think he really got burned out after that 2015 playoff cup run. I mean, you saw what he did in that. It was unbelievable. And, with the age getting up there too, that contributes as well. And, frankly, the one who I look at, honestly, really kind of declining is Seabrook. I just see a much bigger decline with him, honestly.
Yeah, and it's a hit or miss with him because some games he'll just look like turd sandwich, and then some games he'll come out there and look good, and you're like,
yeah,
it's like somebody bipolar, and you're like, I don't understand, if it's, he pulls a Dwayne Wade, except instead of sitting out, he just sort of half-asses it in the games. I don't know what the deal is, but you're right. He just doesn't look the same, and maybe it's, the swapping of defensive pairings, that, things get masked where, before it was, he had a stronger pairing partner. I don't know what the deal is, but, in the game against Winnipeg the other day is they had during these, games that they lose, you're seeing the same reoccurring things. Is the Blackhawks way outshot in the first period.
Mm-hmm.
You see people aren't clearing bodies out from in front of the goal.
Right.
And you're seeing the opposing team enter the zone without any sort of pressure at all. They're just freely entering the zone and entering it with speed. Once you enter the zone with speed, is you can create a lot of things because then you're reacting rather than being aggressive. And it's, part of that is what they're trying to do, keeping these games close and sloshing through the mud almost to slow the pace of the game down and keep it low scoring and use their goalie advantage. But you can't just keep letting these teams with speed just fly around like that. It's not a recipe for success in the playoffs. Excuse me.
Absolutely, and I mean, they darn well know that. They have all the playoff experience in the world. Now, here is something I was thinking about today, and I look at their offense, and I look at the way they run, whether it's 5-on-5, 5-on-4, 5-on-3, whatever. I just feel like now, the Hawks' offense is really predictable for other teams' defense. Do you agree at all in any way? I just feel like they get into the same habits where they pass more than they should. They kind of stay stationary at some point on the ice. You have two guys on either side of the net. They don't really have as much in-front net presence. And they pass around from the points across the goal mouth. And I just feel like it's very predictable, especially on the power play.
Yeah, you're seeing predictable offense. You're seeing a lack of greasy goals. Bodies up in front, and part of that is they don't have a guy. I mean, Jonathan Toews will try, but he's just not that guy to stand in front of the net and dominate like other guys in the league. He's not that guy. He'll try and he'll do anything he can, but just not that guy. You also a lot of one-timer attempts that with passes that are just off, or they get a funny hop and they start wobbling or end up on their side and you can't get a good shot off, or one to two too many passes when they should just be shooting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you see some power plays when they take another pass rather than taking another shot. When, as they say, good things happen when you put them on net, especially when you have a man advantage. Look at the teams of the past. I think the best Blackhawks teams were from 2013 to 2015. Now, you could also say the 2010 team was also very good. It was a lot younger, but think about that. That roster was actually pretty different besides the core. But you look at kind of the main core that the Blackhawks have had since about 2012, after that first cup. They had the ability to skate circles around defenders. They would change things all the time. And now, you don't see that, like you said. And you mentioned a bunch of things that happen when, the passes aren't as smooth and they kind of bounce around and whatnot. And another example to kind of sum that all up is you look at Patrick Kane in the shootout. Those moves aren't fooling those goalies anymore. They just know to stay up. And he doesn't completely destroy goalies like he once did. It's just, I feel like a lot of the league is kind of adjusting to their play finally. And the Hawks don't really have as much of a counter for it. It doesn't help that we lost some talent over the years, but that skating of circle days really just it's gone. I'm gonna just say it's gone.
Yeah, and another thing with their offense is like part of what made them great is being opportunistic with pucks that the goalie didn't cleanly stop, where it was rebound type goals. Is now it's one shot, and then if they're lucky they get the puck and they reset the offense. It's never they don't get a lot of second chance rebound shots, and that's how opponents score on them. It's
right.
Somebody comes crashing down and they stop that first one, but with all the chaos in front, a man coming crashing down afterwards gets a clean shot and boop, tips it in. And that's a lot of goals against the Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks aren't doing the same in reverse. Is they don't have that speed to be able to do what they did. And I agree with you. And it's funny is you brought up the 2010 Stanley Cup against the Philadelphia Flyers, and that was I think the pivoting point of changing the league to this style of fast pace of fast skaters, because that was not the hallmark of the Flyers. They had they were going to beat you up. They had Chris Pronger, who was going to stop everything, and the Blackhawks they separated. The turning point for the Blackhawks was they split the line up between Toews and Kane, put them on different lines. So eventually Pronger had to either go against the Toews line or the Kane line. He wasn't doing both, and they just used that speed and came back, and Philadelphia had no answer. And the league after 7 seasons is caught up.
Sure. I mean, look at the Stanley Cup champions kind of before the Hawks in those years. I mean, look at those grindy Red Wings teams that had a ton of scoring talent and a ton of that, but it was much more of a physical game and kind of relying on a shooting talent, or the Ducks in 2007, you didn't really see, oh, it's a team full of just speedsters. No, it was a different game back then.
Yeah, and going back to the game the other day against Nashville, that was their first win of their last 6 games. That's their only win.
Yeah.
And that's a team that they should be dominating, as Nashville is not very good right now. And
No, they're not.
they had all they can do, the Blackhawks, to win that game. And you're double shifting Patrick Kane at the end. You shouldn't be double shifting Patrick Kane to get a win against Nashville.
Right. I mean, he was right back out on the ice when he scored right away.
And again, it's another game where you got outshot in the first, another game where you're allowing easy entries into the zone for the other team, and you're not getting this puck luck, and you're not having guys in front of the goalie to create blind spots, to deflect shots, to get rebounds. It's not there. Those 2 games were like the epitome of where the Blackhawks aren't doing well, and I don't think it's bad coaching, because
No.
Quenneville is going to do what he knows how to win, and it's a fact that you had to fill out a roster, the last several roster spots with players making nickels and dimes rather than millions because of the top end talent.
Right, and I mean, look how many guys they've had to call up from Rockford to fill in spots. And, that is one thing we got to keep in mind, that most fans got to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of inexperience on this team right now. You have guys like, you look at Hartman and Hinestroza. Those guys are showing a lot of talent, and they're showing a lot of promise. But they're inexperienced, so they've got, a lot to learn. And even smaller guys like Tanner Caro and like Rasmussen, I know he's been around longer, but it wasn't like he was always an everyday NHL player. But, they're trying to blend together and mash up. I mean, you look at the teams from 2013, 2014, 2015, those were, for the most part, all guys who had that experience. It all meshed together. Sure, in 13, you added Saad that year, but he blended in pretty nicely. So, and then even in 2010, they were young guys, but they all had experience. They added a lot of veterans to that team, whether it was Sopel at defense or it was John Madden. You added those kind of guys. This team has a lot of inexperience. And, are their NHL futures bright? I think so. I think Hinestroza, I really like that kid. Is he going to be a Sidney Crosby? Obviously not, but he could be a very, solid NHL player. In the way, you play with these veterans like Kane and Tays, there's got to be kind of an adjustment period for a little bit. And this is what really makes this Hawks team kind of weird and interesting, because you can say, yeah, they're a talented team. Yeah, they're finding ways to win, but they have a lot of flaws. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the record doesn't always reflect the flaws, because yes, they find ways to win. Yes, they find opportune times to score goals, but they're not scoring goals at the rate that they used to, and they're kind of just banking on goaltending to bail, because how many times have we seen the goaltending bail out the team for a win, or at least the point? It's happened so many times. So, looking forward, you got a lot of decisions to make. You got to say, well, here comes the expansion draft as well. You got to think about that. And what's the future like? And like I said, I think though we have some young talent on this team, the window for the championship is closing. But that doesn't mean they can't get together this year, because I think they have just as well of a shot to possibly win the cup. We've seen what they've done in the playoffs. I mean, I wasn't really that confident about them winning in 2015, to be honest with you, but they did. So they could always pull something off. There's no doubt about that. But, right now, there's just not a lot that we're seeing of that's the same. It's very different, is what I want to say. It's very different.
Yeah, they absolutely have a puncher's chance to win it this year. There's no, I mean, the teams that are on fire, that everyone's hyping up and talking about, they're flash in the pan teams that fizzle out come the end of the season, except for the Penguins. But the Penguins are a legit team. But
yeah,
again,
with a lot of veteran players.
They're another team like the Blackhawks, where a lot of top heavy money and they're filling it in with other players. And but if you think about it, I would match up the Blackhawks any day with them. I think because the Blackhawks have much better goaltending.
Sure.
And that goaltending, the old adage is goaltending wins cups. And if it comes down to it, is Corey Crawford is a much better goalie.
Yeah. Now, here's something that I kind of want to bring up, an interesting thought that I kind of want to talk about, saying how going forward for this team, kind of the philosophy, look at the Detroit Red Wings and look at what they are right now and look at what they've been since like 2010, the turn of the decade, or at least when they last went to the Stanley Cup Finals, which was 2009. Ever since then, they've been the team that just kind of keeps that playoff streak alive and doesn't go anywhere. We've seen for years that they've only made the second round a few times, and the last time was against the Hawks in 2013 when we won against them in the second round, their last year in the Western Conference. That is kind of something that I worry about happening in the near future, that we'll be good enough to make the playoffs, but we'll lose enough where we're not really going to go anywhere. I don't know if you think that's a legit concern, but hopefully it doesn't get to that kind of point, because it's kind of going back to the whole mediocre thing. They don't really have much of a future right now overall. It's just kind of like, well, we're playing to keep that playoff streak alive, when sometimes you got to be like, all right, it's not about just making the playoffs, it's about winning a championship. And I hope that kind of thing doesn't happen to the Hawks for a long period of time. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's a fear that I have, but first of all, is the Red Wings streak is going to get snapped this year. I don't think they're making.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I watched their game yesterday against Toronto, where they lost.
Yes, I did too.
And that 3-on-3 was so bad. Both teams, It was so bad in the overtime, and it was this team is they're veterans, while they probably have that savvy and still some talent. They just don't have the speed to play in this league. And if that
Right.
was 10 years ago, and they were, you just put them in the 10-year ago era, but they're same, physical attributes, same age, et cetera, they would still be playing really well, because of the game wasn't as fast. And now it's just so fast that these guys aren't aging as gracefully as they have in previous eras. But with that said,
Right.
The Red Wings is, if you watch minor league hockey, they've got quite a bit of talent that's getting ready to come up. They're going to
absolutely.
They're going to be, it's, maybe not next year, but the year after, they're going to be right back in there to being a competitive team again. So it's,
Yeah, Grand Rapids, they got a lot of guys down there.
Grand Rapids is, they dominate the Ice Hogs regularly when they play, I mean, physically and talent wise. So they're just, they're out physicaling them, they're out playing them, they're out scoring. It's every facet. They're better than what the Blackhawks have in the minors, and the Blackhawks
Sure.
don't have a bad minor league system. So you've got a lot of talent, and so it's a scary comparison, because you don't want to linger in that, oh, we made the playoffs, now what kind of thing. But it's, if the Blackhawks can do that, where they make the playoffs for a long time, and they at least scare teams when they're playing them, and then after a down year or two can reload with young talent, I'd be okay with that, because we have enough Stanley Cups where
Absolutely.
I can, as a Chicago fan that likes to live in the past, I can live with those three.
Yeah, I mean, look at what they've done. It's not like the Hawks have underachieved and just kind of, well, we've been good, but we keep losing in the playoffs, or, hey, we won in 2010, but that was it. I'll be completely honest with you, and when I'm done talking, you can kind of get your input on this as well. I'm kind of curious to hear what you think, but in the years like 2011, 2012, I was really kind of worried that 2010 team was going to be the only cup we'd see from this franchise in this era. I thought it was going to be like, well, that was their cup year. I mean, obviously they proved me wrong with the way they reloaded and brought back in 2013, but I want to kind of hear your opinion on that. So, but this era that we've had what? How many Western Conference Finals appearances, 3 Finals appearances, 3 Stanley Cups. I kind of said that in 2015, I'm like, I really want them to get this third because I feel like a third cup is almost at the satisfactory level where it's kind of like anything less with that group of guys with the way they came back in 2013 and won that. I thought, maybe anything less than 3 was kind of disappointing where when you get 3, that's pretty good. Obviously, you want as many as you can, but it's not like we're sitting here saying, hey, they keep underachieving even though they have a great team. At least they had this. So that's why it doesn't make this potential closing of the window quite as upsetting as it was, say, the Bears window closing when they didn't really win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I'm a chronic worrier. So after they won 2010, I was so excited, and then as soon as that excitement wore off, I'm going through that. I'm starting to phase into that with the Cubs. I'm like, what if they never win again? What if they don't? But the rational side of me was like, I mean, this is a really good team, and they're going to compete. Even if they don't win, they're going to be one of those, like, when the playoffs start, you go, here are the top 3 teams we think could win. They're going to be in that conversation. But honestly, what it came down to is, if it wasn't for the LA Kings, this would be regarded as one of the best dynasties in hockey, in the modern hockey era.
Yeah. Yep.
And in the salary cap era, it's going to be really hard to duplicate what they've done. You could do things like what the Wings have done, but to do what the Blackhawks did, it's going to be really tough. That was a hell of a team, and that they're still together.
Right, and I mean, I think of that LA series now, even though they won in 2015 sometimes, I'm just like, man, we could have had a three-peat. I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, we lost our chance at a three-peat because of a fluke goal off Nick Leddy's chest in overtime.
Yeah, I still, that series still breaks my heart.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was summed up in that word, just heartbreaking. That was heartbreaking. That was probably, to me, the roughest loss of the Kane Tays era by far. I mean, yeah, last year's Game 7 was frustrating, but I think the Blues were clearly the better team last year. And you look at Vancouver, they almost had the best comeback in NHL history, but that salary cap bitten team, I really don't think, even if they would have beaten Vancouver, I really don't know if they would have gone on to win the Cup or beat Boston that year for sure. But that 2014 team, because they win that game, they win the Cup. I think most people knew that the winner of that game was winning the Cup. The Rangers that year really were not that good. And
the New York beat writers were writing
close.
the same thing. I mean, the New York beat writers were like, all right, well, the winner of this conference final is going to get the luxury of losing to either the Blackhawks or the Kings.
Yeah, exactly. The West was so good. So many good teams that year, and the East really wasn't as good that year. And, if they won in 2014, some people say, well, would they have the will to win in 2015? Would the same thing would have happened? I guess we'll never know for sure, but I bet it would have. I still think if they won in 2014, they could have won again in 2015. Even though I will say, I think, and again, I want to hear your opinion on this. I do think at times it was kind of a miracle they won in 2015. I feel like people like Corey Crawford and Duncan Keith stepped up beyond almost human abilities to contribute to that cup run, because you looked at the teams that they were playing against. I'm like, well, the Predators, they were really good that year. The Wild were just on fire after that poor start in the first half. And the Ducks, I thought if there's a team that is going to beat us in the Western Conference, it's that Ducks team. And I really, really thought that, I'm like, okay, we can beat them, but I think the Ducks have the favor. So, not a miracle as in a fluke, but I think it's pretty amazing they were able to pull that off.
The thing about it is they beat teams that were built to beat the Blackhawks. Like teams
Right,
were,
exactly.
That's the thing.
Exactly.
It was like when Jordan used to beat the Jordan Stoppers. That's what they did, is they beat teams that were built to them. And,
They beat the Knicks, they beat the Pacers.
No, I mean, I'm not trying to take too much credit for this, but, the day the Blackhawks beat the Ducks in that series is I saved a bunch of baby ducks that were getting hypothermia. They fell in a sewer grate, and I knocked on a bunch of doors because there was a car parked on the sewer grate, and I couldn't pull it up until I found the person whose car it was. So they moved their car, pulled the sewer grate up, went in the sewer, pulled the ducks out, and I thought they were dead. And they were a bunch of people that lived in the block came out to see what was going on. Somebody brought out a hairdryer, hair dried them. It was like the dead rising. They came alive.
Wow, the miracle.
And the mom got scared, and that's why she ran into her car. And all the babies tried to follow her, and they fell through the slats in the sewer cover.
Yeah.
And so then she ended up leaving, crossing the street, and with the baby ducks that didn't fall in there. And I pulled out the baby ducks and saved like 5 of them, brought them in. I'm like, I don't know what to do with baby ducks. What was it, a Saturday night or a Sunday night? I'm like, I'm Googling where to find duck food in Chicago on a Saturday night or whatever it was. And
when they won the conference.
And so the game had already started, and like I was coming home, with my wife and my daughter we were just grabbing some ice cream, and we walked, and we were coming back and saved the ducks. And so we come home, and my daughter wasn't walking yet, so we were pulling her in a Red Ryder wagon, and then we ended up coming back with a Red Ryder wagon with her and a bunch of ducks, and so sitting in my basement watching the game with a bunch of baby ducks that I'm trying to keep alive. I'm like,
and how ironic is that they were playing the Ducks?
That's why I'm like, this was karma. So it was like the Ducks can't win this series because I just saved these baby ducks.
You saved the Ducks.
Yeah, so I saved the Ducks off the ice, so the Blackhawks had to beat them on the ice.
Yeah, and that was a heck of a series if you remember. I mean, every game was a nail biter.
Yeah, I mean, who was I can't remember who was from the Ducks. It was like, said before the last game, was like, no humans can take the punishment that we're giving out, and the Blackhawks just took all that punishment, still won it. The Ducks are probably still sitting there going, what the hell happened? How did we lose that?
Yeah, I mean, the final score was 5-3. That score really did not reflect on the Hawks. The Hawks beat them down. I mean, they had leads of 4-0 and 5-2. They scored some, just kind of a garbage time goal with less than a minute to go in the game, but they jumped on them in that game 7. They jumped out to that 2-0 lead like right away. Taves had a great game. After all those close games, they just beat them up on their home ice in that game 7. And when they did that, I'm like, man, I think they could win another one. And there was a lot of hype from Tampa Bay, rightfully so. That Tampa Bay team was really good, but I'm like, man, this Hawks team, it feels like they could beat anyone because, as you said, those teams were built to beat the Blackhawks, and I truly thought that the team that was really built to beat the Blackhawks, physically especially, was that Ducks team, and the Hawks won.
Yeah, I mean, that series was basically the hockey version of a Rocky movie fight where they come out slugging and Rocky just gets his brains beat in for several rounds, and they're like, how can he possibly win this fight? And then he comes back at the end and, wins and screaming, Adrian! And you're like, oh, and you're cheering and going crazy, and you're like, I still don't know how this happened, but I'm happy it did.
Yeah. I mean, they lost game 1, and then they won game 2 in that triple overtime. Then in game 3, they lost 2-1. Game 4, they won in overtime. Game 5, they forced overtime with less than 2 minutes, Tay scoring the 2 goals. They win close in Game 6, and then they beat up in Game 7. I mean, it was one of the most entertaining series to watch, I think, of any of the Blackhawks playoff runs. And there have been a lot of great series, but that is definitely a memorable one for sure.
Yeah, and going back to the team that knocked them out last year, is they played the Blues today, and first of all, I love the outdoor hockey, the Winter Classics. They're fun. I went to the one at Wrigley.
Oh yeah,
it was cold. It was really cold, but it was so much fun. Even though they lost, it was a lot of good back and forth banter with Red Wings fans. It was a really fun experience, and
there were a lot of Wings fans there, weren't there?
There were so many. There was one behind me that kept screaming, "Put the piggy in the basket! Put the piggy in the basket!"
Oh God.
I didn't like, but the rest of them were okay. I mean, there was a lot of good natured ribbing, but
sure.
It was so much fun. But this one was terrible. It basically epitomized the city of St. Louis. Dark, dreary, terrible. And trying to watch this, it was like I heard somebody described it as wearing sunglasses trying to watch a game wearing sunglasses at night. It was, you just wanted to scream at NBC to wipe their camera lenses.
Oh, and the overhead with the drone, that drives me crazy.
Oh my God, it's so bad. Remember, you might be too young to remember this, but I think it was Fox that tried to do this thing that they put
the puck highlight.
The puck highlight, so you could see where the puck was. It was
horrible.
So bad.
Oh, that was awful.
And it's the same thing. Is the overhead? Nobody liked it. Nobody liked it.
Nobody.
And the thing is I get hockey fans hate any sort of change. And I remember when they announced the 3-on-3 overtime rule, is everyone lost their minds until they saw it, and they were like, I like this. And so they all changed their mind. Yeah, it's great, but nobody liked it when they first announced it. It's like it was my least favorite time of year in hockey is the announcement of new rule changes, is because you just get these old curmudgeons that are like, I'm mad. I don't even understand how this is going to affect anything, but I'm mad. And
right.
Like the whole icing rule where you're not skating all the way down. There's people still mad about that. But
the hybrid icing.
Yeah, and so, people have gravitated towards the 3-on-3 because it's really good change. But, this overhead cam thing is terrible and nobody likes it, and it's not an official rule, but NBC is dumb for doing that.
I agree. I mean, they kept going back to it, and there were times when there was a play happening. Like, for example, the Crawford save on Tarasenko, I barely saw it. The camera was on the other end. It was looking out, and you could barely see it.
The best view I had was somebody tweeted out, they must have been at the game. They tweeted out their own personal video of it. I'll try to find it and send it to you if I can find it.
Yeah.
But it was the game was a rough game because, I mean, the Hawks scored early, Kempney with another goal, and they kept it close until that third period, and then just all the talent of the Blues sort of came out, and Tarasenko just dominated with his speed and his skill, and had 2 goals in the third and broke a 1-1 tie, and should have had another one. And that one-timer, that Berglund to Bouwmeester, that was a great goal. Like, there was nothing Crawford could do.
It was.
It
was.
You're seeing breakdowns of the Blackhawks defense there.
Right, and it was kind of one of those things when it was 1-1. I'm like, the way this is going, the Blues are going to score any minute now. Sure enough, they did, and then they did it a few more times. It was really not a good game at all for the Hawks. I mean, they had some good looks earlier in the game, but ever since midpoint, it was all just very, very blah. And one of the things, I'm going to just kind of vent on this a little bit and just let it out now. I'll agree the Winter Classic is a fun thing. It's cool, the atmosphere is great. But at the end of the day, it's a regular season game. It's not Game 7 of the finals. It's not Game 7 in the Western Conference Finals. It's not even a playoff game. It is a mid-season, regular season game. And I say that because online I've been getting a lot of banter from Blues fans saying how we can't win the big game outdoors. Well, first of all, saying the Blackhawks can't win a big game when they've won 3 cups since 2010 is kind of silly. And outdoors, indoors, it's 2 points for the Blues.
Yeah, Cleveland Browns of the NHL. When was the last time you hoisted a cup?
You haven't been to a conference, or you haven't been to a Stanley Cup final since the 70s. I mean, come on.
Yeah, so, St. Louis is a terrible place, and I'll never like the fans. I'll never like their teams, and I'll never like their city. And if they wanna carry around a game outside in the rain, not even they're not even halfway through the regular season, and if they want to carry that around, fine, go ahead. The playoffs, when the playoffs come, if you win the Stanley Cup, then you can brag. But until then, you're a wannabe team, and we're still at the top of the mountain.
Right, and NBC was saying how they beat the Blackhawks last year in the 7th game of the first round, and they've leveled the playing field. No, not at all. If you win a couple cups, you even the playing field, but they've had this good team for years. They've had a good team for years, and it seems like every year St. Louis kind of barks all in all how they're going to run away with the cup, and then they end up losing in the first round. I mean, last year they finally got to the Western Conference Finals. Don't get me wrong.
Choked.
The Sharks got them. Got eaten by the Sharks. I mean, don't get me wrong. St. Louis has some very talented players. Tarasenko, Steen, Pietrangelo, Jake Allen. I watched him a lot when he was on the Chicago Wolves here. He's a good player, and there are a lot of good players on that team. But to say they've evened the playing field while beating the Hawks once in the playoffs in this era, after the Hawks have been to 5 conference finals, 3 cup finals, and have won 3 Stanley Cups. I mean, I just think that's a little absurd. I mean, for example, when the Cubs beat the Cardinals in 2015, I was ecstatic. I was celebrating. I was loving every second of it. But I'm like, it's not going to really make as much of an impact on the rivalry as if the Cubs actually know what it's like to win a World Series, and they have. And what I'm really just trying to say overall is I'll gain more respect for the Blues when they actually win a Stanley Cup, because they haven't even gotten to a Cup Finals yet in this era. So, I just kind of wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I completely agree. It's don't walk the walk if or don't talk the talk if you can't walk the walk. And your team had a good year last year, and you're playing okay this year. But until you at least make a final and make a run for that cup, you're just a fledgling team that's a wannabe.
Right, and they kind of play that whole stand up to those big bad classless Hawks type deal, and it's just like, okay, I don't know if you've seen this on social media or not, but there was this poll. Someone was asking if Corey Crawford is one of the dirtiest players in the NHL. I had to blink twice to see if that was real. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't, but I mean, are they talking about the tripping play from the other night? If so, that's if you skate across the goalie zone, you get what you get. I mean,
yeah, he was in the blue paint.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch other goalies, they'll whack you with their stick. They'll do all kinds of things. You know what? That's what you do. You have to take ownership of that, because if you don't, they're going to, bully you inside of it. You've got to take ownership of that and man up and push through it.
I mean, look, he didn't even use his his stick at all. He literally just kind of skated, just kind of moved a little bit. I mean, come on. There are goalies who will literally swing their sticks at you. Look at the feud between Sean Avery and remember the goaltender? Obviously, you probably should. Thomas on the Bruins. They were slashing at each other constantly. They were going for each other's legs and trying to push each other over. And I know he'd get into it with Martin Brodeur as well. I mean, that Martin Brodeur and Sean Avery were hacking and whacking at each other. And it's like, you don't think twice about that. But when Corey Crawford just kind of moves a little bit in his own crease, people flip out.
Yeah, and that's the thing is when you have right now the closest the thing that the NHL has to a hated Yankees type team that the perennial winner is the Blackhawks. So people are going to find anything they can to be mad at them. And
yeah, I mean, let's face it, we're pretty much the most hated team right now.
Yeah, and if that's the worst you can find, then yeah, I mean, they try to run with the Patrick Kane rape thing, and and as much as I was ready to put his feet to the fire, it turned out that the girl made the story up.
Right.
And
yeah.
So then people had nothing to say. So it was, this is a pretty squeaky clean team.
Right. I mean, there have been a few times when the Blackhawks have done some things that you could say, okay, like I'll admit, the Duncan Keith thing last year against the Wild where he slashed the guy's face, that wasn't a good move at all. And yeah. I'll admit that was probably the one moment where I looked at something a Hawks player did and was kind of ashamed of my team in it. But, I mean, you can bring up the wakey wakey Bacchus thing, but, I mean, Blues players do that all the time. I don't, I mean, look at guys like Reeves and some of those other players that they pull that stuff all the time. Look at what Steve Ott did for so many years. I mean, come on. But when you go to the extent that Keith uncharacteristically did last year, then I could see why people were upset.
Yeah. Oh well. All right. Well, let's wrap this up by talking a little bit about the Bears. They finally wrapped up Week 17 of the NFL is over. We know what the playoff matchups are, and surprisingly, the Bears didn't make the playoffs.
So close, right?
So close. But the Bears did wrap up. They got what I thought was very important is, I mean, as much as I hate seeing the Bears lose, I felt that they needed to lose this last game. There was nothing that could come good from winning this game. If they did, there was the shot that they could move all the way up to like the 5th or 6th spot in the draft, which doesn't sound that bad, but there's a handful of just absolute monsters in this draft. And if you fall out of the top 3, you really run the risk of losing out on one of those 3. So I thought it was really important that the Bears get a top 3 draft pick. And it was actually, had the 49ers pulled that game out against the Seahawks, the Bears would have got the number 2 pick. Because the tiebreaker in the NFL isn't head-to-head matchups or anything, it's strength of schedule. And the Bears they're tied for the second easiest schedule in the NFL. So they had the tiebreaker versus everybody except Green Bay, who had the easiest schedule of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of satisfied with where we are. Obviously you want as high as you want, but getting 3rd is pretty good as well. I mean, the Bears could have easily been like 10th or something if they would have pulled out of some of those few close games. So losing those close games, it is worth it for the draft pick. So now we know where we are, and I think there's a good idea of some areas that need to be addressed. I think it's easy to say record-wise, this was, the worst Bears season in a while. I mean, didn't they finish 3-13 in like 2002, around that era? But in the last 10 years, record-wise, it was the worst year. I still think that 2014 team was worse, even though they had 2 more wins. But, the last game, they got destroyed, absolutely. I'm sure you'll hint on this later, and I'm sure we'll talk more in depth later, but I think you really got to look and see, hey, maybe Matt Barkley shouldn't even be considered for a roster spot next year. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, Matt, the best part about these last couple weeks is I think it really opened everybody's eyes that were, because the Bears fans, they're not dumb. They're just, I think they get irrational about the quarterback position because we've never really had a good one. I mean, our best quarterback, their best quarterbacks ever have been a guy that probably most people never saw because they weren't alive. Jim McMahon, who wasn't even that good. He was mediocre. He was just what they needed at the time. And Jay Cutler. So it just, mediocrity appears good in this town because we don't have a frame of reference. And
right. We don't have an Aaron Rodgers or a Bart Starr or a Brett Favre.
Or a Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. They don't have any of these guys.
You could go on, yeah.
I mean, not even in the history of this organization. So it's when you see a Matt Barkley come in who the rest of the league is pretty much given up on, and he has a couple of okay games. And I mean, they were okay games. Like his quarterback rating was like 80 in those good games, which is not that good. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is like 107. So there's a big difference. So when he played okay and he wasn't turning the ball over like crazy, everyone just suddenly was like, oh my God, maybe we found the quarterback. Everything's going to be okay. I think it was a good thing that he's played so bad because it's forcing the Bears' hand. They can't maintain the status quo. They know Jay Cutler's not the answer. They can't continue with Jay Cutler. They know they don't have the quarterback of the future on their roster because Matt Barkley, what does he have? 11 interceptions in the last 3 games?
Yeah, I mean, look at the game against the Redskins where most of their drives in the second half ended with a turnover. And, I mean, he threw an interception. What was it, the first drive of the game for the Bears on Sunday? It was another interception?
Yeah, first drive of the game. And it was a really... And this is the number one criticism I have against him is that he doesn't have a strong enough arm. I mean, Peyton Manning was able to get through with a lacking arm strength because he was so smart and he was better than any offensive coordinator you could have on the sideline. He was going to be on the field figuring out your defense, figuring out where those holes are and throwing it there. He wasn't relying on deep balls, but Matt Barkley's not that guy. Matt Barkley needs to be able to stretch the defense with with long passes, and this wasn't even that long of a pass. And he throws this soft lob into double coverage to Josh Bellamy. Not Alshon Jeffrey, mind you. Not, Randy Moss. He's throwing it to Josh Bellamy. And
right.
And so when you're underthrowing it into double coverage in the NFL, it's going to get interception. Bad things are going to happen. And he should have thrown that. It should have been a deep pass into the corner, and that's where you're supposed to throw.
Right, and you see some of his kind of off-balance throws where he's off the wrong foot, and we talked about this earlier. You kind of touched up on it a little bit, implying kind of with the hang time. I mean, that gives so much time for the defenders to get up there and grab it. So, my whole thing on Matt Barkley, I'm just going to kind of sum up my thoughts. He had some nice moments. I'll give him credit for that. But he shows he's not going to be some future star in the NFL. He's just not. And I know he had a lot of situations where his passes were being dropped, and I felt bad for him at the time. But I feel like the times he was effective, when he kind of came mid-season, when Jay Cutler got hurt, he was done for the year, and it was against like the Titans and whatnot. They kind of milked the usefulness they had out of him, and in the last few games, it was just, all thumbs down, not good. And we've also seen him have trouble kind of protecting the football because he's lost some fumbles himself as well that, should be better protected. So, if he's at training camp next year as kind of like as a backup, I mean, I won't have much of a problem with it. If they flat out say, hey, we're tanking another year, so don't expect wins, I mean, I guess, but if you're trying to go into a real positive direction starting next year, you can't have Matt Barkley as your starting QB. You just can't.
No, I mean, the things I like about Matt Barkley is when he came into the games, he stepped in. I mean, he wasn't on this team in training camp. They had no interest. He wasn't on their radar. They lost a quarterback to a broken leg, and they weren't. David Fales clearly wasn't in their future. They brought him onto the team after training camp. But he stepped in, and a lot of times when you have backup quarterback, they come out there and they look like statues, and they underthrow, overthrow. And he came out there and looked passionate and looked like he had command of this team, and his team hasn't given up on him. Those are all great qualities to have. And if they want to bring him in to compete for the backup spot, I'm fine with it. And again, even if they were to come out and just say, hey, listen, we are still another year away from competing, and we're going to bring him back to compete for a starting spot because we're drafting a young quarterback. We're going to go into free agency. We're going to do all these things and everything to try to find a quarterback. I'm fine with that too, because I think the worst thing you can do in the NFL is be desperate to do desperate things to get a quarterback. And that's how teams get stuck in quagmires. That's how you wind up being the Browns. That's how you wind up being the Rams.
Right.
You don't want to be in that quagmire of can't find a quarterback and do, and reach everywhere you can to try to get them. That's how good teams stay good, is they find that quarterback, and all the while they're trying out guys. They're behind the scenes, you don't see it because they don't play. They bring in a guy that, the mid-round, late-round draft, castaways from other teams, undrafted free agents. They keep trying them out and circling through them until they find somebody that's like, all right, well, that's good. And, we can work with this guy and put him in our system. And then they have, and like, that's what bad teams will do, but bad teams have to do that on the fly, on the field, in a regular season game when it matters. Good teams do it in practice, in training camp, behind the scenes, and when you don't see it, and it doesn't affect you in the record. That's how you have a winning franchise. The Bears.
Yeah, it's all about that development.
Yeah, the Bears are in a position where they don't have that quarterback. There's not a lot in free agency. There's very little. I mean, you have some of the best options in free agency in Hoyer and Barkley. So do you go out there and you trade, overpay for a Jimmy Garoppolo or overpay for a Tony Romo? I don't think so. But if you think about the Seattle Seahawks, they went out there and they brought in Flynn for big money. They brought in Tavares Jackson, who had been a starting quarterback in the NFL, and was a cast-off. So they had a guy with starting experience. That was one style. They had Matt Flynn, who was a former backup that they paid big money to, and then they drafted this quarterback in the third round, and two of those players didn't pan out at all. One panned out and led this to, from a joke team to a perennial powerhouse in the playoffs. And the Bears need to do something like that. They need to approach every avenue. Is, try to sign somebody's castaway that you think you can work with. Try to make a trade for somebody's backup that you think you can work with. Draft somebody. And if you find you've got the guy you want, is keep drafting quarterbacks, because you need to keep developing somebody behind them. And if they turn out to be good and they're blocked by somebody even better, trade them away for more draft picks.
There you go. I mean, you can never have enough draft picks in the NFL, right?
No, I went through. I'll have to go find the notes and talk about it on the air again. But I went through this whole analysis where I went through like 10 years of drafts and that's statistically, it's not that these teams that draft really well, that keep developing players and keep being good. It's not that they draft better than everybody else. It's the common thread has been that they have more picks. So if you look at the number of quality years you're getting out of draft picks for the Green Bay Packers, for the Baltimore Ravens, for the Patriots, it's not that significantly different than what you're getting from the Bears. The big difference is that you have so many more, you're averaging almost double the number of picks, like 25-30% more picks by every year. So you have more chances to swing at the fences to get these players. If you're hitting out of 5 out of 10, then if you draft 10 guys, you're going to have 5. And if you draft 6 players, you only get 3. It's just the statistics. And the Bears have traded so many picks away for other things that they just haven't had as many picks. And I think the regime now is they're very cognizant of trading picks away to move around, and they would rather stockpile picks. And I think that's important. Is more picks is more gooder.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you have so many resources. The more picks you have the ability to fill in young talent in places you need, and also as trade bait. It's kind of like, it's almost like the currency of the NFL. It kind of is a key to bringing in talent and making things work, than more than just money. But draft picks are also kind of a secondary currency. It's really important. It's not always about drafting the best player. It's drafting smart, what you need, and using picks the right way, whether it's a trade or actually drafting a player. And, the Bears had a ton of draft picks last year, and, they got some notable guys. I mean, look at when they drafted Jordan Howard, people were like, what the heck are they drafting Jordan Howard for? They're wasting this pick. And he's been their best player this year. I mean, that is one thing that you can take away from this Bears season that was good, and that was Jordan Howard being really, really, really good. He had a ridiculous amount of rushing yards. He broke the rookie record for rushing yards for the Chicago Bears.
He finished the season second in football in rushing.
Yeah. And he wasn't even starting every game to start the season, too.
No, and if you look, last year under Adam Gase, the Bears were 7th in number of rushes versus number of passes. So in that, much more favoring the run than the pass ratio. They were 7th in the league. And this year, they're at the bottom. Is way more passes than rushes. And this year, they're averaging almost a whole yard per carry better than they did last year. So if you were to reverse that and run that many more times compared to passes, just think of how much better you could be on offense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's just a frustrating thing. Going back to this game, this game was like a comic cartoon version that over exemplified everything that was right and wrong with the Bears. You saw, your quarterback who, a lot of people are like, oh, I think he could be good, come out and just have a disaster and really do a Jay Cutler with, making boneheaded mistakes, some poor throws, not protecting the football, fumbling. You see the stud running back look fantastic against a really good defense. You see the safety play was right up there as some of their worst games ever. And even that first touchdown that Cordell Patterson caught, Adrian Amos was nowhere to be found. You left Crayvon LeBlanc again one-on-one with him, and I like Crayvon LeBlanc, but he is a nickel or a dime guy, not your starting cornerback that you put on an island with a decent receiver. And
he had that nice pick. I'll give him that.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking him. It's just it's also bad when you're expecting help over the top and it's just not there.
Right. Exactly.
So you play differently. If you know that if you're being put on a complete island and you have to cover this guy, no matter if he goes, if they start on their own 5 and he runs all the way into the end zone, you have to have him on an island. You're going to play that differently than if you have help over the top. And a lot of times that Crayvon LeBlanc has looked bad, he clearly looks like he's supposed to have help over the top. And if you watch the coach's view, the wide view, you'll see that a safety is has that oh crap moment and starts running, as fast as they can to get there, and just not getting there.
He's left out to dry.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. This team has such bad safety play that there's no hope for the secondary as a whole, because this the epitome was, you've been getting decent pass rush, but you're just so injury riddled on the defensive front that you have no depth, and your guys are getting winded. You're not getting the pass rush that you've been getting, which means that the quarterback has more time to throw, and your safety play is at its worst, which means these cornerbacks are out to dry, and it just got exacerbated in this game.
Yeah, I mean, look at the way that Bradford picked apart the secondary. And like you said, this game was the epitome of the status of the Bears. The quarterback situation, not in a good position. Our running future is in a great position because Jordan Howard had another great game. The secondary is not good, needs a total overhaul there. And you benched Barkley and brought a guy in named Fales. And Fales came in and was off by like 20 feet on his first few throws. So, yeah, it pretty much summed up the Bears' season all right there. And as the clock was winding down, it was all coming to an end. I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, next year, all those guys that were on IR, most of them should be back. Hopefully they'll stay off IR, and what will be done in this year's draft. There were so many things I was asking myself when this game was done, because, it's off season now, and of course I was saying, what's going to be the status of John Fox and Loggins and Fangio? What are they going to do with the front office? Are they going to add, subtract anything? They're just, when you're in a team in this position, you ask so many questions when the team is done playing, when they're completely done with the year. And it's kind of hard to know where to start asking questions, because there's so many of them. So, at least we had the comfort of knowing that we were getting a top 3 pick. We knew that we weren't going to be a playoff team a long time ago, so it's not like a Week 17 heartbreaker. And we knew that, looking at our division, that we are right now the lowest of all those teams, because everyone else was 500 or better. So, now there's a lot to think about in this offseason. There really is.
Yeah, and for me, I really do think Ryan Pace has a plan, and he's been doing some good things, and I like him better than the last several general managers the Bears have had. But
Absolutely.
One big knock on him is he is not in front of the media answering questions. When he does interviews, he puts things out, he's doing it through team sources like Larry Meyer for ChicagoBears.com. Like, nobody's asking him the hard questions. He's getting the softballs lobbed to him, throwing out a few sound bites, and then disappearing back into the shadows and leaving John Fox out there to answer all the questions. And it's frustrating, as media. That's frustrating as a fan, that he should be out there. As much as I criticize Jerry Angelo and a lot of things he did, is Jerry Angelo answered all the hard questions. He
Sure.
He may not have given you answers that you wanted to hear, and he may have tried to do some John Fox double talk or nonsensical stuff, but at least he was there, front and center. Anytime something bad happened, he was there talking. That was something, and you don't hear that with Ryan Pace.
That's a great point.
And some of the big takeaway things from the Bears is absolutely far and away the worst season the Chicago Bears have had in their whole franchise, with the number of takeaways they had, was last year at 17. They finished.
It was only 10 this year?
11. They finished 11
yeah,
this
because
year.
of LeBlanc. Yeah.
So you think about that, and 11 turnovers in the whole season. When Lovey's team was rolling along, is you might have gotten that in like 2-3 games.
Yeah, look at the last days of Lovey, and look how much offense was generated off defensive turnovers.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
And so this team, what they need is I don't mind what they've been doing as far as building depth talent. Is their original plan was to put top line talent in there and keep churning the bottom of the roster until they found players they liked.
Right.
That's a great plan, but monkey wrench got thrown in there because all of the top talent that you brought in is hurt. So now you are just throwing these guys out, and the benefit of be able to throw these guys out is you got a big opportunity to see who can play, who can't. Because in pads or in shorts in practice and in the classroom, you don't get that sense. That's the reason Jordan Howard didn't start this season, is because he, in shorts, not that impressive. When he put the pads on and you put him in front of another opposing team, then he's like a Mack truck. And so they're like, well, we can't not play this guy. And that's the thing. So you've got to see a lot of guys and see who got heart, who can play, and who can't play. You got to see Cameron Meredith stepped up and looked like he's got some talent there. I mean, you're not going to put him as your number one, but he's definitely, you realize you've got enough roster talent at wide receiver that if you bring Alshon back and you bring Kevin White back, you can get rid of Eddie Royal and not lose anything, especially since he's got no production because he's hurt. You've got some nice depth at linebacker, so assuming that Trevathan comes back and Jarrell Freeman can stay drug-free, that you're going to have nice depth there.
Right, yeah.
Is you get another year of the off-season workouts and weightlifting and strength conditioning for Leonard Floyd, and you get another several months of healing for Pernell McPhee, and maybe you get Houston back. I don't know if he's in the cards, but it's suddenly your defense starts adding depth. You bring in you've seen a few nice things with Crevon LeBlanc, so if you bring in some starting corners and you move him down the depth chart, that bodes well for you. Offense is Cody Whitehair stepped up. You've created an issue where your starting center coming into the season is, what do you do with him? And that's a good problem to have. He's either going to be a backup or he's going to be somebody you can trade. You've got wide receiver talent, and you've got your running back for the next 5 years. So there's a lot of things that have come about from this season. But what they do need to add is they need to add playmakers to add more turnovers. Gotta have that.
Yeah. I mean, 10 turnovers in one season. I mean, that's horrible.
Yeah, I mean
that's horrible, especially for Bears standard that prides itself on defense and taking the ball away.
I mean, look at the statistics of that game against the Vikings. They were about even in yards. They were about even in time of possession. Like, based on that, you would have guessed that this was a 3 to 5 point Vikings win, not a 28.
Yeah, like a 17-14 game.
Yeah, like that's based on the statistics. But then it was those 5 turnovers.
Right.
The Bears have been pretty good this season, considering how few turnovers they have generated. Is being a defense. So with all the injuries, lack of, depth talent, no secondary at all, and not generating turnovers, they were 15th in total defense based on yardage. That's not bad. I mean, they ended up being like 23rd or so as far as scoring defenses, but there's at least
and they had some pretty solid moments in the red zone too. Like, they were stuffing guys pretty well.
Yeah, so there's things to work with on this defense. There's a lot of work still to be done, but there's bright spots. But like I said, they're going to have to start adding more top end talent. So Kevin White's is going to be right now he's that big black mark on Ryan Pace's legacy as a general manager, is because that was his first pick. And I think he's a very talented guy, but he's got to drink his milk because he's got some brittle bones.
Yeah, to say the least. I mean, I got to tell you, Kevin White, I'm not so sure about him. I know there's a lot to talk about, but I don't know about you, but Kevin White, I just don't see a bright future for him. I don't know. I don't know what you think, but that's just kind of my opinion.
I think if you can keep him healthy, injury free, that you are going to have a stud, an absolute stud, and I will stand by that.
It has nothing to do with abilities for me. It's the injuries that worry me.
The injuries worry me a lot, and it's weird because they're not injuries that you would ever expect when you're scouting a guy, and broken bones. Like there's no like magic test. Like if you have somebody that's got a knee injury, all right, you can be like, all right, we know about this going in, but broken bones just happen. Like there's nothing.
Right.
There's no, it's not like they're doing bone density tests on these players and, put them on calcium tablets. Like bones just breaking. And you look at, a guy like Zach Miller who breaks a lot of bones, and it sucks because he's
pretty good for what he is.
Yeah. He's a pretty talented guy, and, bones break, and there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no strength and conditioning that you can do to strengthen those. It's just, Kevin White's done the right thing. He's had the longer recovery surgery in hopes of, reinforcing bones and having it healed correctly and coming back next year when they start fresh with a clean slate. But, if it just is one of those crappy things, it's just bones.
Right. I mean, that's what the talent is obviously there. He wouldn't have been drafted in the first round high if he didn't have talent. I mean, it's disappointing to see all these injuries happen because he was drafted, after the 2014 season, and you wanted to see that 2014 season turn into something positive. And so far, he's only played a few games, and the way he's looked in a few games, you just got to say, well, he hasn't had the experience because he's been so injured. And if these injuries keep up, it's just not going to work out. And that's why I just don't have that much hope right now. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not counting on it right now. And I hate to say that, but that's just kind of how I feel about him. But I really, really hope he proves those doubts wrong, because I know he's got the ability. I know he's very talented, but these injuries are just, they're awful.
Yeah. And so, you had the boom or bust pick with Kevin White. That's right now it's not looking very good. Leonard Floyd was another boom or bust pick that's looking very promising. And this year you have a number 3 pick, and you have to play this so right if you're Ryan Pace. Because if you go out there and the first mock draft by a big name has come out already, I don't know if you saw it, Matt Miller put his first mock draft out, and he had at number 3 the Bears taking quarterback Josh Allen out of University of Wyoming. That's
number 3.
Yes. And Greg Gabriel, the former Bears head of pro scouting or college scouting, tweeted out, "That's the dumbest thing he's ever heard." I was like, I just retweeted it because it's
yeah, I want to see this.
It's not a good pick, especially when the Bears, Ryan Pace, their philosophy is drafting the best player available, and things will work themselves out. And you have to trust your system. You have to trust your board. This is a total trap right here. Is you're like, I'm so desperate for a quarterback that I'm going to reach for somebody, and reaching for the quarterback is the worst thing you can do in the NFL. Is reaching for a quarterback is what sets franchises back. And if the Bears go out there and make that smart choice and take one of those top 3 defensive players, any 3 of those are a win for the Bears, and they're going to have a much better defense, and the quarterback situation will work itself out. I think there's never been a draft, I don't think, where there's been no good quarterbacks that came out of it. So somewhere in this, you know, mired in this ness of mediocre quarterbacks in this draft, somebody's going to be good. Is scout them well, draft them later. If need be.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to approach it.
Yeah, you've got the number 3 pick in the second round. That's almost like a first rounder. Is if you identify somebody late in the first round that you like. I mean, if a Deshaun Kaiser, you like him, but not enough to go 3, and or a Brad Kaya, if one of those falls down to the later part of the first round, is, then you can move up with your number 3 pick in the second round and couple it with a third round pick, and you don't like to lose those, but you move up, you take that quarterback late, and then suddenly you look smart because you got that stud defensive player, and then you can come back later on and get that, a decent quarterback that you can develop.
Right, because, you have the 3rd overall pick. You're not just going to be like, oh, let's just address what we need no matter the skill level. You got to say, we got the 3rd overall pick. We're going to take some very premier talent here because we didn't have a horrible season just for nothing. I mean, I know they need a quarterback for the future, but just to draft him 3rd overall just because you need him, that's just crazy. I mean, obviously, if there was the draft when it had Winston, or the draft when it had RG3 and Andrew Luck, but that is not the case. So you're not going to do that. And, I truly believe that Ryan Pace is a very smart football guy. I do think he knows what he's doing. I think he knows what he wants. I think he knows what he needs. I know we don't see him a lot in the media, but I do believe he knows what he's doing. And I am confident that he's going to keep going with whatever plan he had in mind draft-wise that he has. So, there's a really great defensive player available, then you take him, and then, you get a quarterback in another round. So, yeah, that pick, 3rd overall, sounds pretty crazy, to put it lightly.
Yeah, and then the last 2 topics I wanted to bring up, the first one is Alshon made a comment after the game was over, season's over, they lost to the Vikings badly, and he guaranteed the Bears would win the Super Bowl next year. And a lot of people are just out there being like, oh, he's crazy, what are they talking about? Is the way I look at this is that comment to me is a very childish way of saying he wants to be back next year. And he wants to be a team player. That's what I heard. Is he can't say, I'm sorry that I let the team down with my drug suspension. I'm sorry I let the team down by not showing up for OTAs. I'm sorry I let you down by getting injured. I'm sorry I held out last year and created a nuisance and didn't sign a big money contract. He won't say those things. So instead he said, I'm going to sound like the biggest team player, and I'm going to say, we're going to win the Super Bowl. And I think, and if you're the Bears, you've got a really tough situation. And I know you and I are on opposite sides of this, and I don't know which one is right. But everything inside of me says you can't keep giving up talent without getting anything in return. So if you're the Bears, right. I can't see them just letting him walk. Is if you can find a way to franchise him and then trade him, if you don't want him, at least get something back for him. You don't have to get the 2 first rounders, because if you make if they sign you away under the franchise tag, it's automatic, you get those picks. But if you decide to trade him, then it's whatever you accept. So if they at least get something for him decent, then you're not letting him walk for nothing. But that cap number, if you tag him, it's $17 million this year. And that's a lot of money to lock up to a wide receiver that hasn't proved what he can do. And I think he can do a whole lot. It just, he hasn't been able to prove it. And my hope is that they can sign him to a nice deal that keeps him around for 4 years, then maybe like a 4-year, $48 million contract. That's something reasonable. I think that's nice money for him. It gives the Bears flexibility to be able to move that money around, front load it now that they have all this cap room, and then he doesn't cost as much later on, whatever the case may be. I think that's a fair thing for both sides. As long as he's willing to say, I am not going to hold out for the being the highest paid wide receiver in history. And the sad part is if they let him go into free agency and they don't sign him, before that free agency period starts, is there's going to be desperate teams out there that throw stupid amounts of money at him.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying with all that. And the thing that I took away from that is at least there's kind of like a positive attitude, not like, oh, we're terrible, this is all a joke, everything's bad. I mean, it's better to have a good attitude moving forward. And it's an interesting point you made about Alshon, that it shows that he wants to be here, he wants to be a team player. And I think that could suggest it. Do I think he may think differently at times? Sure, I think it's shown. But he clearly wants to be a team player, and I think he would have a desire to win here. But, it's better that he says something like that than many other things. Let's just say that. So, we'll see what happens with Alshon. Earlier in the season, I thought more and more that he was going to be gone. Maybe I'm starting to change my thoughts on that a little bit. I mean, only time will tell for sure. But, a lot of people laughed at it. And at first, I got to admit, I'm like, oh, geez, give me a break. But then I really thought about it. I'm like, at least he has that attitude. At least, he has a desire to win. Not just say, oh, pay me. At least it kind of shows a desire to win. So, that I thought it was at least somewhat of a positive comment to hear at the end of the year after a really, really bad year. So, only time will tell what happens. Will he be accurate in his prediction? Will he even be in a Bears uniform? We'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about it is, the whole philosophy of you got to make sure you're adding top talent. If you let him go, is who in the draft are you going to get that's going to be better than Alshon Jeffrey? That's the thing you have to ask yourself, is who is the guy that's replacing the guy we let go better than the guy we had? And that's the
you can't just get rid of him. You got to replace him.
Yeah, so that's the mentality you have when you're the Bears, is every position we have to upgrade, and unless there's absolutely no upgrade out there, and there's a lot of room on this team to upgrade, and a lot of it shouldn't be that hard. Safety positions shouldn't be hard to upgrade, but if you come back with, even if you come back with this offensive line, the same offensive line that you have under contract, that's not the worst offensive line you can have. You have a healthy Kyle Long, Cody Whitehair, Josh Sitton with, learning your offense for the whole offseason. You come back with Jordan Howard, knowing you have healthy Kevin White, Alshon Jeffrey, and Cam Meredith as your third. And suddenly you're like, all right, this offense isn't so bad. If we can have a quarterback that just doesn't turn the ball over a ton. And that kind of leads to my last point I want to talk about, is that the rumor is that John Fox is not going to be fired. Mm-hmm. He's going to be retained. Now the question arises is will Vic Fangio return, and will Dowell Loggins return? And if Dowell Loggins, who's the most likely one to be cast off, gets cast off, do they hire Mike McCoy as their offensive coordinator, who was just fired yesterday by the Chargers?
Well, the whole thing with John Fox is that obviously he was an upgrade over Trestman, but this really has nothing to do with Trestman. But there were just times when you see John Fox and you listen to what he says and you're just like, what are you BSing us again? And because a lot of the times it seems like that was the case. You kind of said earlier he's a mediocre coach, and he has had some success in the past, but obviously if we would have gone in a different direction a few years ago, things would be much different, but you can't really play that game. If the Bears decide to keep John Fox for one more season, I mean, I won't be like jumping for joy, but I won't be like super mad about it either. I think that there are times when he plays way too conservative. I think some of his play calling offensively, whether it's Loggins or him, because I think Loggins should go. I think that's a definite should go. I mean, the offense doing things that when it should be doing the opposite, sometimes I feel like that's Loggins, sometimes I feel like it's Fox, sometimes I really don't know which it is, but I think a new offensive coordinator would really benefit, because if you look at what Adam Gase was doing last year, it was much different than Loggins is doing, and Adam Gase was playing to the strength of the Bears' attack, and that was, a good run game, where Loggins didn't, as we said earlier, was the opposite, but I have so many different feelings about John Fox. It's not like Mark Trestman where I straight up thought he was trash, because he frankly was trash. But I feel like giving him one more year, it's not the most ideal, but I feel like it's not the end of the world. Now, an interesting name that would be considered maybe, I don't know, it depends on what the Lions do here, a guy like Jim Bob Cooter. I mean, he has an awesome name, but you look at what he's done offensively with the Lions, and if he were to go elsewhere and coach, it would be a head coaching position, so obviously they'd have to fire Fox first. But that situation, I think, is a little more gray than black and white than other coach firings in the past, but I don't know. Part of me thinks I wish they'd look elsewhere for a head coach. Part of me thinks John Fox, one more year. I won't love it, but I won't hate it.
The two positives that I can say about John Fox and is being part of the media is he's miserable to us. He's miserable.
Yeah.
And he talks to us like we're stupid and tells a lot of BS. But this team never quit. As bad as they are.
No, they didn't.
They never quit. At the end of this last game, they probably... They weren't trying as hard as they could, but they would never quit. They never, ever, ever quit. That's a positive, is when you start...
Absolutely.
If you're able to maintain that locker room with as bad of a season that they've had, as many injuries and suspensions and just, losing a game by a guy dropping a pass that hits him in the hands in the end zone. Like, all of those things just, like, other teams could just implode. Look at any Chip Kelly team. They just implode. And that's what...
Yeah.
But John Fox held this team together. The other thing John Fox has going for him, and this was Lovey's downfall, is Lovey put together a good defense. Lovey could do those things. Lovey could bring in defensive coaches because he had a Rolodex of defensive coaches that, he worked with and that liked him and wanted to work with his players. He didn't have the connections through the NFL to be able to bring somebody to be the offensive coordinator. And he, at one point, threw his hands up, so the organization sort of just went out and brought in Mike Martz. And that was a disaster because he didn't...
Jay Cutler did not like Martz at all.
Nobody liked Martz. And that was a problem. And because Lovey, it's followed him through into college, is he doesn't have this Rolodex of offensive coaches that can come work for him. John Fox brought Adam Gase. Adam Gase was basically primed to get a head coaching job, and John Fox just reached out and pulled him in. He only got him for a year, but that was a great year for considering all the injuries they had at wide receiver and having Jay Cutler. He put together a great year, and he has a lot of connections through all of his years, and is miserable as he can be to the media, is as far as the brotherhood of coaches go, he's really well regarded. And he worked with Mike McCoy and recommended Mike McCoy and let him walk to a division rival in the Chargers. And I could honestly see him bringing in Mike McCoy, because Mike McCoy was a pretty darn good offensive coordinator, and bringing him in, so there are names out there that you can bring in. I mean, he brought Vic Fangio over, who was a great pick.
Yeah, he brought Vic Fangio, and that was huge.
Yeah, and that's the thing is bringing him back for 1 year and letting him have a healthy team, putting some more talent with him, having another off season, and putting together a team that didn't quit, that had a lot of fight in them, and bringing in coaches who are better. And I think last year they just kind of got caught in, I think they really thought Adam Gase wasn't leaving, because it looked like that. It was kind of the last minute Miami was like, Adam Gase. And I think the Bears were caught off guard, and they went scrambling, and they didn't have the person they wanted. So they're like, you know what? We're just going to promote within and try to continue what we were doing. I don't think that was
and it didn't really work out.
It didn't work out. And I don't think Dow Logans is a bad, it was like when Mark Trestman was here, he kept putting guys in, everybody was a position higher than they've ever been as a coach. So nobody was there to be that stabilizing force. I mean, if you promote one person, you have a whole stable of people around him that have been at that position that can help build them until they're, it's like when you start a new job, you're not good at it right away the first time you do it. Even if you might.
Right, it was an experience.
Yeah, so Mark Trestman brought in, everybody was new at that position, and so nobody had that experience, and they just floundered. And I just think they didn't have the support around Dow Logans to be that guy. And I think he was a decent quarterbacks coach. They need a guy with experience. And if they could bring in somebody with experience, with healthy, wide receiver core, this running game I think you can stabilize that quarterback position at least long enough to develop somebody.
Right, and all that stuff you listed, it pretty much goes to show that, like I said earlier, it's kind of a gray area with John Fox, because there are things he does well, and there are things that just make your head hurt because you don't know what to make of them, and they're just so strange, and they sometimes fall flat on its face. But that's, at least if John Fox does stay and he does bring in someone else of a notable name, like we mentioned earlier, that could be really advantageous for the Bears. So that's why if there's that potential, why I wouldn't be 100% upset if he stayed. But if he went and somebody else with experience and somebody notable came in, then I wouldn't be upset either. So that pretty much sums up me kind of being on the gray scale of everything, because, I mean, it was clear with guys like Mark Trestman that he was awful and needed to be fired, or you go back to like Dick Duran or something. But, it's interesting. There are times Fox drove me crazy. There were times where I'm like, all right, I like what you're doing, Fox. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And, hopefully the offensive coaching at least changes, and pray to God that Vic Fangio stays around. So, there's a lot to be seen within the next few months.
Yeah, this offseason is going to be interesting. And if they don't play their cards right, it's going to be another bad season next year. But if they have a little luck on their side and they play it well, I think the Bears can be a very, I'm not saying Super Bowl by any stretch, but they can be a competitive team that people don't really want to play, because it's going to be a all-out brawl through the whole game. So, I mean,
I just want to see vast improvement. Improvement is the key word.
And I think that's, there's the chance for that happening. But I think, we had a really good show. So,
great show.
Yeah, so we're going to wrap it up for this week. We'll be back next week with some more goodness, and we're getting that point where we'll start talking about college players and who's going to be in the draft. It's my favorite time of the year, is draft season. So thank you guys so much for listening. Please make sure that you check out the Twitters, Swerski, at Swerski Sports. And Alex, do you want to give your Twitter handle?
At ShyFanPat1 is my Twitter handle. You could look for Alex Pat on Twitter.
And check us out at Facebook, facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com. And thank you so much for listening. Hit us up, follow or subscribe on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, however you listen to podcasts. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on the plains. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears. Oh, when the Bears go Bears.